I'm going to press now.
Yeah, so hi everyone, we're back with another episode on Ask Grit. We have Navin De Silva, our MD, who is all the way in Australia and is joining us today. And we have Shaheen Samat, our head of sales, who's based here in Sri Lanka, coming to you with another episode to answer all your questions. Right. So, Shaheen, would you like to start off with the questions? We'll be focusing mainly on overseas investors looking to invest in Australian properties. So as last week, we've been focusing mainly on Australia, on people living in Australia. So mostly on citizens and residents there. So this week, we're moving more towards the overseas investors. So Shaheen, would you like to start off with a question?
Yeah, hi, good evening to you, Navin. And good afternoon to you, Ransi.
Good evening, guys.
Good
in
evening,
Sri Lanka, Navin is in Melbourne. Let's put Navin on the hot seat and let's see what he has to say and how we can help the people over here. So Navin, are you ready to answer these tough questions that have been thrown to you?
Go for it. Go for your life.
Lovely. Right, Navin, first of all, let's touch upon I think this is a thing that's running through everyone's minds, especially the overseas investors. About the pandemic, I mean, we know where we stand right now when it comes to the pandemic and how it has affected so many economies, to real estate markets, to you name it. It's affected everyone and everything. But could you give us a little bit of an idea of how it has really affected the Aussie property market and where do they stand now?
Yeah, with the pandemic, I mean, as we know, there was a big impact last, I would say, April to September, October timeframe. But now in Australia, everything is pretty much under control. Everything is very well under control. But government is very cautious. So certain boundaries of states have been closed. You got to enter with a permit. In terms of the market, it's stinking hot at the moment. And the reason for that is government was very, very smart by offering a lot of grants for the first home buyers. So as a first home buyer, there is about $40,000 to $50,000 or even up to $65,000 on offer for people who buy their first home. This has drastically changed the landscape of the property market, and pretty much every state in Australia, the market is on an upward trend.
Brilliant. That looks like, that sounds like good news. Also, Navin, now, when it comes to the grants, let me clarify this again. This is only applicable to residents and citizens. What about those people on a temporary visa, provisional visa, or a work permit? Just throwing it out there for people who might be confused on how these grants work.
Yes, that's a very fair question. A lot of people get confused because there were like 3-4 types of grants. Grants applicable only for citizens and permanent residents. Even if you're in Australia on a temporary visa or different temporary visas or work visas, the government grants will not apply, and it will not apply for foreigners or non-residents as well. So it's only for PR holders and citizens.
Lovely. What do you have for Navin, Ransi?
Right. So, Navin, now we've always spoken about residents investing in Australia. That is very common. But why would you suggest overseas investors to invest in Australia, and why Australia in specific? This is something we get all the time. So would you like to maybe explain to us and tell us why Australia in specific?
Yeah, no, that's right. It's a very common question, especially by the non-residents.
Yeah.
I mean, number one reason is it's a safe economy to invest on. As an investor overseas, it's always good to diversify their investments into a safe economy and a stable economy. So that's number one. Even through COVID, Australia's economic resilience was showcased, and that's what it's all about. Stability is number one, I would think. Number two is in terms of the currency, Australian dollar is very, very strong at the moment, especially with currencies like Sri Lanka or some of the other currencies in the Southeast Asian market. Again, as an investor, they're going to gain a lot on the currency apart from the property appreciation. Number three is it can be an investor. If you're putting your investment hat on, Australian properties can only go up because the population is growing and they need property. So if you're looking at the long term, in a 5 to 10 year span, property can only go up. There's only 25 million people in Australia, which is very close to the Sri Lankan population. So it can only go up.
Yeah. Right. Thank you for that. So the other question is, Navin, now the dollar has appreciated, and this is something we sort of saw coming, but we weren't very sure of it. But it actually happened. How do you think this is going to impact the overseas investors?
Yeah, so people who are planning for it for some time, there is an impact because it'll certainly jump their capital expenditure to start off with. But if you look at the long term, I mean, currently it's about 70 cents over US, and if you're comparing with the Sri Lankan rupee, it's about 151, 152, where it was about 130 to 40 before. So it's certainly a jump from the capital expenditure. But then again, if you look at the long term, dollar is going to be very strong because especially the mining sector is booming, which is a lot of exports are happening. So the outlook for the dollar is going to be strong. So in the long term, they are only going to make a gain.
So you would suggest that this would be the best time for them to invest?
This is the best time because the market is in the verge of going up. So there's no point in buying when the market is up. You got to buy right now.
Right now. All right. Shine, anything else?
Brilliant. Navin, what is the cardinal rule when it comes to a foreigner buying property in Australia? What do they need to know? What do they need to consider?
Number one is it has to be a brand new property. Any foreigner can buy properties in Australia, but the property has to be brand new. So they cannot buy old properties or established properties. The reason for that is there is a body called Foreign Investment Review Board, which is the government authority who authorizes foreign transaction. The reason for that is that will make sure there's construction jobs being created. It's good for the construction industry as a whole, and it'll stimulate the economy. And as long as the property is brand new, any foreigner can buy. I think that's rule number one.
Nice. So, I mean, those opportunities are great. The property just has to be brand new and you're in for the game, and you can invest in Australian properties, unlike in other. And also, I think, I mean, you need to just elaborate a bit. As a foreigner, you can have freehold titles, right?
It is a freehold title, certainly. It is a freehold title. There's no leasehold, except for Canberra. Canberra property is always leasehold, even for locals. Every piece of land is owned by the government, but every other state, it is a freehold property.
Great.
So, Navin, just a question that I want to ask you. How is the rental market currently in Australia?
Rental market is twofold. One is, if you look at the apartments in the city, the majority of the tenants were the students. Because of the pandemic, most of the students, especially the Chinese students, have gone back to their home countries, as well as a lot of students have gone back to the home countries because everything is done online still. So because of that, it has created a big vacuum in the rental market in the city apartments. City apartments are not easy to rent at the moment, and I think that will be the case for the next few months until the students return. Whereas it's completely opposite in the suburbs. In the suburbs, the rental market is as usual. Even during COVID, there was no impact at all, except for the period where we couldn't move because of the restrictions. But people are moving around and business as usual. Rental market is as usual. I mean, we typically rent out properties in 1 to 2 weeks time.
That's good news. That's amazing.
Also, Navin, how much can a foreigner borrow, and where can they borrow from when it comes to financing in Australia?
Yeah, so as a foreigner, they can, based on where they are, they can borrow from a few financial institutions. They can borrow up to 60 to 70% of the property value, which means their contribution is 30 to 40% plus the stamp duty and the legal fees, which is fantastic. And the interest rates are around 4.5 to 5%. Pretty good interest rates even for foreigners. And that's a huge opportunity, because they are only putting 30 to 40% of capital towards the property and enjoying 100% capital appreciation on the other side.
And that also means that the rent will always cover the mortgage.
Correct.
Really?
And that's the ideal situation where we want to structure it accordingly, where we want to cover the mortgage through the rent so that it's going to be a hassle-free investment until they sell the property at the end.
Yeah, I just got a question. Sorry, Ransi. Just got a question from Julian. He wants to know, Navin, in terms of mortgages. Once you have financed a property, like in Sri Lanka, do you get mortgage insurance? You get insurance on your mortgage in case you encounter any issues in terms of the payments due to various reasons. Do you have that insurance to back you up?
Yeah, no, very good question. Mortgage insurance has to be taken when you exceed 80% loan to value ratio, meaning when you're going over 80%. So that is not applicable for foreigners because they're only borrowing 60 to 70%. But as a local, when you're going over 80%, if they're going 90 or 95% or even 85%, you have to pay mortgage insurance, which is security for the bank. But when you're borrowing 60 to 70%, bank is not at risk at all. There has never been a situation where a property has gone down in value by 30 to 40%. So bank is always on the upper hand, where in case something goes wrong, they can easily sell the property and take care of themselves.
That's amazing. So Navin, since we were talking about mortgages and renting it out, can you just explain a bit more on ROI, return of investments?
Yeah. So typical as a foreigner, typical return on investment when they sell the property is between 15% to 20% per annum when they sell the property. What we need to understand is through the rental income, if you go for a mortgage, you're not going to get a net return. It will set off the mortgage, but you're getting the return when you sell the property. So it's a long-term investment. Typically, we advise investors to keep the property for 5 to 6 years to get the maximum return.
Okay.
So now, does that apply to all types of properties, or do you have any certain recommendations? For example, do I invest in an apartment? Do I invest in a house and land, or townhouse? What would be your recommendation or GRIT's recommendation for a foreigner investing in property? Pure investment, not for residential need, not for gifting need. This is a pure investment. What do I do?
You got to get some land. Land is what appreciates. Our recommendation is go for a house and land in a developing suburb. We always target suburbs where there's train stations coming up, shopping centers coming up, employment hubs, things like that. There is a perception around most foreigners that when you go to a suburb, it's too far and rentability is tough, which is not the case. There's always been people who wants to rent out properties. But if you look at the long-term growth, house and land, you simply cannot go wrong. because of the population growth as well as the developments involved. So we strongly recommend house and land options for investors. On the other hand, if it's a parent who wants to invest, it's always best to go for an apartment simply because of convenience for their children. Because when you invest in a house and land, you're looking at least 40 to 45-minute commute to the university, which might not be practical in the long run for the son or daughter. So in that case, apartment. For investors, definitely houses.
So Navin, since you said it's best to invest in a house and land, if you're looking at a pure investment, where would you say would you know of any suburbs that are developing right now? What would be the best suburbs you could recommend?
Right now, if you look at the southeastern corridor, there is suburbs like Clyde, Berwick, Officer. Those would be the best ones in the southeast of Melbourne. If you look at the north, there's places like Mickleham, Cloverton, which are really growing. There's so many things happening over there. And then if you look at the west, you get places like Deanside, Plumpton, Werribee, and those kind of areas, which is really booming. And if you look at Sydney, I mean, I'm talking about Melbourne and Sydney because those are the most popular ones. If you look at Sydney, there is an airport coming up called Western Sydney Airport, which will be completed in 2026, 2027. So close to that airport will be very, very hot in the years to come.
That's actually news to us about the airport opening up in Sydney. That would be amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, very, very crucial question as a foreigner.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
What's that?
Yeah, brace yourself for this question. How do I know my money is safe? I'm over here, my money is going there.
Yeah.
How do I know my money is safe?
Yeah. No, fair question. That's the most important thing for investor, whether it's foreign, local, whatever it is. Yeah, I mean, as a foreigner, one is you're buying a hard asset. You're buying a property, and the property will be under your name and no one else's name, and it's a freehold property. So you have the security on that, and you will get a copy of the title under your name. So that's the number one security. And in terms of the funds, you're not giving the funds to carry out the development to a developer. If it's an apartment, if it's a 10% deposit rest on completion, if it's a house, you pay a 5% and then rest is on land ownership transfer. Until the transfer is done, the money is always held in a lawyer's trust account, which is like an escrow account, which nobody can touch. As a developer, it is illegal for someone to use people's money for their development, which is not the case in most South Asian countries, not only Sri Lanka, but even in Malaysia, Dubai. That's very common that developers will take people's money and carry on with the development, which is a very, very risky proposition for an investor, because in case something happens to the development, the money is gone. So I think those two are the key things for an investor to know. Your money is always safe. All the deposits are going into the trust account, which nobody can touch. Anybody who wants to mess around with the trust account, they can end up in the jail. So the rules are very, very strict. And it's a freehold title. The title will be under your name. The security is yours.
I feel safe already.
That's good.
All right. Do we have any more questions? Are we having any questions coming?
I think there's one more who has asked about construction. How do I validate the quality of the construction? Yeah, very fair question. Yeah, in terms of construction, number one is we used all reputed builders, some of the largest builders in Australia. So the quality checks are done very, very well. At the same time, in terms of quality checks, the builder is doing their quality checks. There'll be independent inspectors doing their quality checks. At the same time, if there's a mortgage, bank is also checking on the completion of each stage before they make the payments. And as the property buyer or the owner have the ability to do quality checks at the end of each stage or at the completion of the house. And if typically these are done by building inspectors, these individual independent building inspectors will give a report, and if there are any defects identified, the builder has to fix it. So that's the way for someone to have a peace of mind. We always encourage that at least at the end, so that they know it's been checked, because anybody can say that the quality has been checked, but if they hire their own inspector to do the quality checks, they will have a peace of mind, and the builder has to fix it at the end. So that's a very good question.
Lovely, lovely. Great question so far.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for explaining them very thoroughly.
No problem. Yeah, there's, I think, one more about Brisbane. Yeah, so about the Brisbane market. As I said before, Brisbane is a growing market. Population growth was not as high as Melbourne, but there's so much of infrastructure developments going on, especially on the southeast Queensland, which is between Gold Coast and Brisbane City. So most economists as well as property gurus predict there will be 5 to 12% growth in the next 1 to 2 years in Brisbane, which is a very, very interesting stat. And I think this will be the case, especially because of the government spend and infrastructure developments which is going on. So as I said, everywhere, all the states, the property is appreciating because of the grants and the infrastructure development which is taking place.
So everything looks very positive. Not the COVID kind though, but in terms of the real estate market, things are looking positive. We need to
Definitely,
be careful
definitely.
when we use the word positive these days, but this is a good positive.
Yes.
And very glad to know these things, because this is going to be very important for our clients over here.
Yeah.
Also, another question: do we get PR when we invest in a property over there? What happens to the visa process? How does it help with visas?
Yeah, PR, there's no direct link between a property investment and PR, unfortunately. But it will obviously help them because it shows that they have interest in the country. To obtain the PR, they have to go through the skill migration or the business migration or the parent migration schemes, which is on offer. Having a property as an asset on their asset base will definitely help them. Short answer is there's no direct link between PR and property. Very good questions.
Indeed.
Yeah, so just to summarize, I think objective of these sessions, we have been doing 9 straight sessions, which was quite engaging, quite useful for most of the audience. These are the common questions we get asked, and we want that to be heard by our own team so that it will be useful for anyone who's listening in. So until we meet next week, have a good night, good evening, and catch you next week.
All right. Thank you so much, Navin.
Thank you so much,
Have a
Navin,
good
for
weekend.
answering all the questions brilliantly as always. Thank you, and let's catch up soon.
Yeah,
Stay
let's see
tuned
you
for
all next week.
10. Is it episode 10? I think it's episode 10, the big 10.
Yes.
Please
That's
join
right.
us on episode 10.
All right then. See you guys.